Hello everyone, Jeff and Jay here with another edition of Jay's Big Adventure. Jay's the Fuzzy Guy, and today we are going to tell the story of our 1988 BMW M3 convertible. So when I originally posted the video of me finding this car and doing the whole barn find thing, I did it just to generate some interest on the car and on this project. I had no idea the fanboys were going to come out in force. Man, there were so many people who never watched the video telling me that's not a real M3. Yeah, Dakar Yellow came out in 1995. So it's either not a real M3 or it's been painted. Had a whole bunch of people tell me that it was a 325 with fenders and all this stuff. It was wildly entertaining. I loved all the speculation and all the stupidity with the posts, especially in Facebook. Oh my God, the fanboys just went crazy. But I wanted to generate interest. And then I had a typo in the description and I said it hadn't moved since 1988, which is pretty hard to do considering it's Dakar Yellow, which came out in 1995. So that just fueled the fire even more. It's been pretty entertaining. But I wanted to tell you what the story is on this car before we go forward. There's a great shop in Indianapolis, Indiana called Zionsville Autosport, and they are a dismantler of BMWs. BMWs are all they do, and they've done this for decades and decades. And that gave them the ability to look at the way the cars were put together in a way that very few people have. They also had the ability to put a whole bunch of pieces on a shelf and say, okay, this part looks like it's going to fit that part. That unique ability and background allowed them to create this M3 convertible. Now what BMW did is they took the front and rear clips from the M3 and combined it with the 325i convertible center section because that's where the top mechanism is. But the front and rear of the cars are not 325i. There are some crash parts that interchange, but the front of the car, the fender wells, those sorts of things are different on an M3, especially true in the back. The trunk floor in an M3 is different from a 325i because it's a large enough well to get a 16-inch tire. Can't remember off the top of my head if the frame rails themselves are stronger or whether those interchange, but the back of the car between the frame rails is different. Obviously the fenders are different. And then of course the entire front clip of the car is real M3. If you look online, you can find other M3 convertibles that have been built, but they just tacked fenders on the cars, and that is not the same level of detail that Zionsville Autosport put into this car because they wanted it to be one of their calling cards. I mean, this is what they can create. Pretty impressive. Anyway, they built the car, and I think it was late 93, early 94, and right before they finished it, the Dakar Yellow E36 M3 came out, and they went, that's the color for this car. And that's why it ended up being Dakar Yellow. They drove the car for several years, and eventually they got to the point where they wanted to move on to another project, and that's when I bought the car. I bought it in, I think, May of 1996. I had a business that bought and sold M cars and early Porsche 911s. And so I would go to Florida on a regular basis and buy an M3 or two and drive them back and then resell them. That's kind of what I did. My business was called The Driver's Edge, which became Improved.com. So this M3 was perfect for my business as my calling card. And it had a couple things kind of stack up on me that kind of changed the course of the direction that the car was going. And I had an employee, we went to Florida to buy two M3s. It had a 91 and I think it was an 89. And the plan was to drive them back to Indiana. And about 100 miles from the Florida border, I'm driving the 91 and the car just shuts off. I mean, just like turned the switch. But there wasn't a lot of engine braking going on, and that's not a good sign. So I double checked, does it shift? Yes, clutch works, change gears, but almost no engine braking. So we pull over to the side of the road and I take the oil filler cap off the valve cover. I can see half the timing chain wound up in the top of the head, and that's never good. And so now we're 100 miles from the Georgia border. There is no car or a trailer or truck that I can rent to get the car home. We had to go all the way to Atlanta, just 300 miles, I think, to the north, get a U-Haul truck and trailer, drive back to Florida, put the car in the trailer, drive it home. At that point, we learned a whole bunch about the F-14. At that point in time, pistons were $500 a piece, valves were $100 a piece, 16 of those. It was quite the experience. We learned a lot, ended up rebuilding the engine. So eventually I sold the white M3, and it went to a customer. Well, it was supposed to go to a customer in South Bend, Indiana. I had my employee drive the car up from Indianapolis to deliver the car, and he totaled it on the way to deliver the car. That was bad. Another bad day. Drove the car back to Indianapolis, and as penance, I had the employee pull the S14 out of the wrecked car and pull the S14 out of the convertible and swap them so that I had the engine that we had just spent a whole bunch of time and money rebuilding in the car that I wanted. At that point, I got a phone call from a guy in Texas who had a race team who was looking for an S14. I had one sitting on the ground and sold that to him. And about that time, I had another buddy who lost his storage space and had a 4,000 mile S52 engine that had been in a 97 M3 66 days from the time it was titled to the time it was totaled. Only had 4,000 miles on it. So I bought that, wanted to do an S50 swap, and then life happened. We got busy raising the girls, I got busy building the business, and the car sat for 3.5 years. During this time, I acquired a couple of other really interesting parts. Another buddy called me and said he had a European 635 close ratio dogleg gearbox. And in a normal transmission, first is up and then second is down, 3, 4, 5. With the dogleg box, first is over and down, but then 2, 3, 4, and 5 are in the H, and that's what the race cars use. It's a much better pattern once you get used to it, and the ratios in that transmission were closer together, which means the engine didn't fall out of the power band as much between shifts, which I really liked. Also had a 1-to-1 top gear, and for a little bit shorter gearing to make it even better on the top end, and just it's a really cool box that people covet, and so I bought it just because it was a cool piece, and I figured worst case scenario is I'll resell it. And that particular transmission doesn't have a bell housing with it, or I didn't get one with it. And eventually I kind of got to thinking about it. I thought, you know, it would be really cool if I could figure out a way to make that transmission fit the S52. And so, of course, backup designs of Autosport, and Dwight said a 1985 535i manual transmission has a separate bell housing that bolts to the transmission. It's like, I wonder if the bolt patterns match. And of course, they had one on hand. And so we bolted the bell housing to the transmission and the transmission to the engine, and by gosh, it all fits. The only thing that we had to do was shorten the carrier for the shift lever. The shift lever comes down, and into the center console there's a cup with the lever pivots in. That carrier had to be shortened, and the shift rod itself had to be shortened. But other than that, every piece in the conversion is factory BMW. At that point, I had a really cool car, and I drove it that way for several years until the fateful day of June 7th, 2008, when we had the flood. I had an old pickup. I should have taken that. The convertible at that point was getting old. The top wasn't completely watertight. I knew if I drove it in heavy rain, the floors were going to get wet, and I just didn't want to mess with it. Should have. And so I took the pickup. And then I had a roommate who called me a couple hours into the day and said, dude, I got out of bed and I stepped into a foot of water in the house. This is a problem. And I said, okay, I'll be here at home. He goes, you don't understand. If the whole neighborhood's underwater, you can't get home. I said, well, I'm going to try. Ended up having to park the car or the truck a half a mile from the house and walk through continually deeper water to get to the home. And by that time, we had almost 4 feet of water in the house. Lost everything I owned, lost the car, and it was a very bad day. People that have been through this, I watched the videos of people dealing with hurricanes, and I feel for them because I know what that's like. Lost stuff, but lost memories, lost pieces of my history, pieces of growing up, pieces of my girls growing up that are just irreplaceable. The car was one of those things. Bought the car back from the insurance company, towed it to a friend's house, and that's where it's at for 13 years. And that's kind of where we are today. So at this point, I've got the car back in Salt Lake City. I am arranging for garage space to try to find a place where I can do the work that needs to be done. And the next series of videos are going to be disassembling the car to find out exactly how much damage has been done. So that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, please share, please subscribe, and we'll have more videos out soon.